Welcome to In Focus with Ejaz Haider. Our top story tonight is a call by China to create a new Middle East forum, a regional multilateral dialogue platform with equal participation of all stakeholders. In a clear signal to the United States, China seems to be shedding its below-the-radar approach to the Middle East. A Middle East, incidentally, is a region that China has been involved with for a very long time and also relies on it for its energy requirements. But this is also a region beset with rivalries and conflicts. China's foreign minister and state councillor Wang Yi has called for a new forum to defuse tensions in the Middle East. His statement came after a meeting with his Iranian counterpart, Javad Zarif, where he reiterated Beijing's support for Tehran. China proposes to build a regional multilateral dialogue platform with equal participation of all stakeholders, said the Chinese Foreign Ministry statement. The forum would enhance mutual understanding through dialogue and explore political and diplomatic solutions to security issues in the Middle East. This is again from the Chinese Foreign Ministry statement. Mr. Wang said support for the nuclear deal negotiated by the Obama administration but abandoned by President Donald Trump would be a precondition of entry to the forum. For West Asia and Middle East watchers, this is a very significant development. It seems to indicate that China is prepared to act as a big power to deal with the many fault lines in the region. It must be remembered that China has cordial relations with Saudi Arabia, the main rival of Iran, with whom Iran has been locked in an acrimonious relationship because of the war in Yemen, Iranian influence in Iraq, and Saudi support for U.S. sanctions on Tehran. So let's get down to business with our panel of experts. We are joined by Einar Tangen, a writer and commentator on political and economic affairs, joins us from Beijing. We also have with us Ejaz Haider, research fellow at Sharif University think tank and a PhD candidate at the University of Oxford. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Let me begin with Mr. Tangen here. Mr. Tangen, as I said, China has been involved in and with the Middle East for a very long time. Of course, energy and various other interests. But it has kind of been very cautious when it comes to getting into the sort of, getting down to the trenches, if you will, because, as I said, there's so many fault lines there. But with this forum, setting up a forum or indicating that there should be such a forum, it seems to be saying, well, we are not really going to be very cautious now. What is your reading of it?
Well, I don't think it's a question of caution. What it comes down to is necessity. You have the U.S. Pulling back, creating, in essence, a vacuum without any kind of plan in place. And that's fine for the U.S., which, if prices of oil go high, can always go back to fracking. But with China, that is not an alternative. It is wedded to the Middle East and to the oil supplies and the relationships that it has there. It wants to see a much more peaceful region, not only for economic reasons, but for purely humanitarian reasons. Now, China brings a very different perspective than the U.S. They don't bring an ideological sense that you have to be one thing. China has its own system, and it respects the systems of others. So I think they're betting or hoping that their approach will be able to do things that the U.S. approach with its kind of top-down, you must be a democratic capitalist society along the lines the U.S. wants and sign lots of contracts with U.S. companies. That will not necessarily be how the Chinese take it, although it is clear that China has a lot of capabilities when it comes to infrastructure, and they will certainly be making those available to countries in the Middle East, which desperately need this infrastructure.
That was Einar Tangen speaking with us. Let me go to Ejaz Haider. Mr. Haider, my sense is, as I was saying to Mr. Tangen, that it kind of sends a signal to, of course, it's a signal to the United States, but it also sends a signal to Saudi Arabia. Is that something that you would agree with?
Yes, I would to an extent. But at the same time, I think we have to look at the timing of this when it comes to this type of news, going public, because, obviously we all know that we have the U.S. elections coming up, but then also 7 months later, we have the Iranian elections coming up. And within that time, there are a vast number of variables that could occur to kind of curb this type of multilateral, dialogue or platform in which China could be spearheading. Because although, you have Jawad Zarif, who did come out and also endorse this. If you do look at the Middle East right now, to have the other countries also be on board at this juncture is quite difficult. You have first Egypt with their own protests, right now happening domestically, and also they have those issues with the Nile Dam, and then you have Syria, Yemen, Libya with their conflicts, and also Kuwait was kind of whispered to be the third Middle Eastern country to go into that quote unquote peace deal with Israel. But now that they have a new emir, we have to sit and wait and see what happens there. There's kind of this shift within the Arab world, I want to say, that is leaning more towards the U.S. And having them kind of side with China on this type of platform, I see that kind of difficult to happen. And once again, if it does happen, this will have to wait until after we see who the next U.S. president is going to be. But then again, there's this other kind of issue, and you did speak to it earlier, and that is China staying below the radar, if you will, when it comes to its foreign policy dealings in the Middle East. So even this move by China, I would argue, would be something more of a symbolic move, because there's been conversations that now China and the U.S. are in this Cold War phase with their trade war, and also their they have those issues with the China South Sea and also Hong Kong. And from the perspective of most Iran experts, is that China doesn't see the relationship with Iran as as this partnership. It's more of Iran being used as a tool to kind of be a thorn in the side of the U.S., if you will. So the extent to how far China will go with the relationship with Iran, in my opinion, depends more on how far the relationship goes with the U.S., that being China.
Stay with me. I'm also joined by Kouroush Shamlou, an international law expert, joins us from Paris. Mr. Shamlou, thank you so much for being on the program. We were talking about the statement by Wang Yi, China's foreign minister and state counselor, which basically says that there's got to be a multilateral dialogue platform. But the precondition for entry into that dialogue platform is an acceptance of the U.S., so basically the Iran nuclear deal, the multilateral nuclear deal. Now, I was arguing before you joined us that China, which has deep involvement with the Middle East for various reasons, including for its energy, sources, stayed below the radar. But now it seems to actually signal something which might not really go down well with those Arab states that look at Iran as a threat. Is that something that you would agree with?
I would agree kind of with that, because China war with the United States, and China still want to hold with this Iran nuclear agreement. Iran, as of today, has no way out. The only way Iran can still hold its economy viable is to go to China, and on the other hand, with Russia. And China is the only country that can hold the Iranian economy alive. And Iran government and principally Mr. Zarif, who went there on Friday, the day right after when the Americans imposed new sanctions on 18 Iranian banks, went to China to negotiate a big accord. At the same time, you had an envoy from the president of Indonesia sent to China, and one envoy from Philippines. And as you know, Indonesia is presiding the Security Council, and the Americans tried to put back sanctions again at this Security Council, but they couldn't, because all the Security Council refused to apply new sanctions on Iran. China is standing there, and they have almost nothing to do, because Iran is almost obliged to go to them and sign an accord, which will be a win-win accord only for China, because Iran has no other way to be able to discuss its position. In this new accord, which is a huge commercial accord, Iran almost has agreed to sell its oil 30% below the market in exchange of China's commodity sent to Iran. So China is trying to hold the situation, to hold the economy viable, and see who, as Mr. Reza said, who the next president of the United States will be. If it's Joe Biden, the former vice president of Barack Obama, who signed the Iran accord, he will get back into the accord and things can change. If it's Trump again, if Trump wins again, the situation will be very difficult with Iran, because Iran's economy is sinking, is choking. They can't do anything. And European countries, European banks do not work with Iran at all. It's not they don't want to work. It's because they are scared to work with Iran, because the American can come, even European companies can impose, can fine on them, and gives penalties to them.
That's because I agree with you. That's because of the sanctions. It's a web, intricate web, and obviously it sucks in even entities that are not American but have businesses in the United States, and things get routed through the American banks. But let me go back to Mr. Khanzadeh here. Mr. Khanzadeh, Mr. Shamlou talked about the possibility of, in the event, shall I say, that former Vice President Joe Biden wins the White House. Do you think there's going to be a major change or at least a rollback of some of the sanctions against Iran?
I do, to a certain extent. We've heard Biden publicly announce that he does want to re-enter the JCPOA. Now, if and or when that happens, and also how that happens, remains to be seen. Once again, going back, because in June of 2021, you have the presidential election in Iran, and from what I've been able to gather on the ground in Iran right now is that the vast majority of the voting population, which happens to be citizens under the age of 35, have been discussing a boycott of that election, which means there's a high probability that a more conservative, a more far right, if you will, candidate will become the next president of Iran. And even if Biden does become president, I don't really see a clear path to where they will have an easy re-entry to the JCPOA without having to give up sections.
That's an interesting thought. I've also almost run out of time, so let me quickly go back to Mr. Shamlou here, because he is the international law expert. Mr. Shamlou, is it possible for, assuming we're talking Biden presidency, that the United States doesn't enter the JCPOA again, because there are obvious other technicalities perhaps or snags, but stays outside It's a UN resolution mandated multilateral agreement and supports it, and also rolls back the sanctions that President Trump slapped on Iran. Now, is that a scenario that you think is plausible?
That's a very plausible scenario, as you said. If and now we're only assuming if Biden wins the presidential election, which might happen, he has a lot of chance to be winning, but we're not sure because 4 years ago it was the same with Hillary Clinton. Joe Biden has few choices. He can enter again the Iran agreement and join it and pull back from the sanction, as you said. Or he can stay, as you said, outside, and the JCPOA will stay in place, and the Americans will roll back their sanction and will give assurance to European countries, more especially to European corporation, companies, that they can go and do business in Iran without being imposed any fine from the American judicial system. This being said, that as Europeans put in place a system called INSTEX, in which European companies can go and do business with Iran without being subject to the American judicial system. But as of today, this INSTEX hasn't done any single work, because even if the European government say we are protecting you, the European companies are scared to go and work with Iran because they're scared of the Americans. So if Joe Biden goes there and says, okay, we're not going to do anything, we're going to let you do some business with Iran, that's a plausible way. But I think he's going to join Ethiopia, and even if Iran, for sure, we're going to have a conservative president in Iran, but Iran is already part of the deal, and they're not going to pull back.
They're not
so far.
They're not going to pull. And I agree with you that whether conservative or whether relatively moderate, Iran does need some kind of reprieve as far as its economy is concerned. But thank you so much to Reza Khanzadeh, to Kouroush Shamlou. We shall take a short break and return.